Hi everyone, welcome back to Tea Time. My name is Brian from the MagicLinks team. And for those of you that are new, Tea Time is a weekly series that we host here on MagicLinks IG Live with the goal of really just having real conversations with different Black leaders in our community and having, tough conversations that are really important ones to have. And so today we are joined by Kiano Moju. She's actually about to join right now, so let me get her on.
Hi,
Hi,
how's
how's
it
it
going?
going?
I'm
Good
good. I'm
morning.
good. I'm
Yeah,
so glad it's about to be a weekend, which has no meaning to my life, but you know,
same, same, but yes, it's like there's no meaning. However, it is nice to like wake up and maybe, I don't know, like enjoy yourself for a minute or two.
exactly.
Yeah. So welcome, Kiano. So I would first like you to just introduce yourself to all of our viewers while we wait for a few more to jump on and then we'll get started.
Yeah, of course. My name is Kiano Moju. I would say I'm in the business of culinary education,
Okay.
but I do it through video. So I am a food video producer. I have a studio in LA where we produce food content and like shoot cooking shows, and are starting up like a video series soon. So
All
lots of
very exciting
all
stuff.
the food things basically.
Yeah, yeah, and we love that. Obvious, of course, it's a great conversation to have with you because Magic Links is video first when it comes to content creators. And so we really are so curious to learn everything that, about your experience, and we'll kind of jump into that. First, I would like to make sure, did you get your tea?
I did. I was thinking like, is this
Okay.
too like monochrome matchy match?
Ooh, okay. I like that. I'm going a little Aussie today. In spirit,
Mm,
I didn't, and so Nicole. Nicole, of course, was in Australia before she came here to Magic Links. So I guess
yes.
this one was inadvertently for Nicole. So
I feel it. Nikki, I'm shocked that Nikki came back to us because Australia is. I
right,
understand why she went.
yeah, of course. So okay, so I mean, let's go ahead and get started to kick off the session for tea time. Kiano, we like to start with just setting an intention and holding it for just a second, and then get diving right in. So for today, I'd say my intention is awareness.
Oh. Does it have to be one word or can it be
No,
like a two word?
no, it can be whatever you want it to be. Yeah.
Oh, intention for me is, which is probably opposite for most people's COVID, but is like slow down.
Okay. I feel that. So let's just close our eyes and set that into the universe, and then we'll get started. All right. So welcome. We're so happy to have you, Kiano. I know that you have a really interesting background, and so when you and I had chatted, you had told me a lot about your experiences at first working at Tasty within the Buzzfeed umbrella, and sort of how that entire journey has led you to now really seek out your finding your own, I guess, avenue, which is awesome because it's such an untapped market in what you're really creating content for right now. Could you kind of start us from the beginning and give us a quick run through of what your time was like at BuzzFeed?
Yeah, so I started like my first like official, I say official job because every job I've done as like most creatives, like just creating stuff on my own. So
Mm-hmm.
the first time like I worked under a full-time employee for another company was for BuzzFeed. And I started as a video producer for Tasty, and it was like at the peak. It was when everyone's Facebook feeds were just like hands and food, hands and food. So it was a lot to learn really fast. But the thing that really took me by surprise when I started that job was how poorly received black hands, brown hands were. And then after, seeing a lot of comments on my videos of asking for the brand to revert to using white people only, or like really showing their discomfort and disdain for it, is when I started taking a deeper look at the industry as a whole and realized that I experienced it at Tasty, but it was an industry wide problem where
Mm-hmm.
there's such limited visible diversity of cultures, backgrounds, and just overall voices in the food space.
Interesting. So, and I guess there's always going to be that level of racism that exists in the world. And, you know, when people come in trolling in the comments and say hateful things, as a brand, I'm curious, what did Tasty do about that? Like,
Nothing really.
uh,
I addressed the problem because I later learned that I was their first and only Black producer. And so it took me some months to really bring it up as an issue because I thought I was like meant to take it on the chin. You know, it's a new job, it's the internet, they're crazy. But when I try to see like what we could do, the company was just like, kind of like, there's nothing.
hmm,
But I was like, I can't take that for an answer because this is my job. I have to deal with this every day.
yeah.
And I'm lucky where my teammates were really supportive, and other Black employees at Buzzfeed, where we on our own just produced more diverse content. So we were able to get more diversity by collaborating with people outside of our department.
Hmm.
And when we did that in like big masses, almost like around a whole initiative, it was much better received than when it was just like me doing it just like every now and then.
Right, right. So it wasn't necessarily like an institutionalized effort, and it feels like maybe leadership wasn't super supportive of that,
No,
or
I always say I just like at one point it was like I went rogue and I was like I don't care.
yeah.
I think for and my mother tells me this all the time. I have never been one to wait for people to catch up once they feel like something's wrong. I was like, nope, this is what I think should be done, and I can't wait for you guys to get on board with this.
Yeah, and so then once you started to go rogue and produce your own content, how was that received?
It was fine. So I kind of did it under, the guise of Black History Month, where I like, we packaged content around that, my coworkers and I, and it did so well. Then doing these like tentpole cultural holiday months became within our editorial workflow.
Hmm.
So it was like kind of like a mini victory because then you notice with a lot of editorial, you see people's cultures and pitches get funneled to, oh, let's just wait for that month.
Hmm.
Oh, if you wanted a Chinese recipe, let's wait for Asian Pacific Heritage Month.
Hmm.
And I think the overall thing that with my work I do today is really pushing the thing that cultural people identity is not seasonal.
Hmm.
It's everyday, and everyone's food is everyday food. So there's no reason to wait for that, 3-4 weeks in the year to showcase it.
You know, and it's kind of interesting that you say that because it sort of brings me back to our general feelings of this year, as if Black Lives Matter was like a June issue of some sort, like that, like had relevance in
Mm-hmm.
June, and it's like, surprise, it's August, and we're still talking about, you know, Black people in America. Like, it's just interesting to sort of see that across the board, how why some, especially a lot of publishers and even within food media, really treat things of racial issues to be something that's almost like, yeah, like it's in a content calendar, which feels really gross.
It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's interesting to me in terms of like, first of all, it's awesome for one, you've broken a lot of change. Like in general, it was fantastic to learn from our last call everything that you did do at Tasty, and that when you experienced things that you weren't okay with, that you really went and you did your own thing, and that's fantastic. I mean, it's shocking to me though that as a brand, you know, you being one of the, you know, well, you said you were the only Black producer at the time that was there.
For Tasty, yes.
Yeah. And so being the only pair of, I guess, what you could consider diverse hands, because your hands are Black, and that being so important, just in representation in every avenue. Yeah, that's just like something that gives me a lot of pause. And so, you know, props to you. And I think like that was an amazing first chapter. So tell us about like what happened next though, because this is when it gets exciting. And I know that Jaconi was the result of all of this.
So I opened my studio, Jaconi, last fall.
Hmm.
So really, I wanted to do this concept before I worked at Tasty. But I think just from working in the industry, I got a little bit more focused, more narrow, and saw not where the gap in the market is, but where I wanted to occupy space within food. Because food is vast. It's in
Hmm.
all of our lives. It's every day. It's globally. Um, and so I'm like, all right, within this, what is the voice I want? And I feel like it was not really chosen for me because there is a part of, it's a two-part where I want my culture and, other underrepresented cultures to be represented. But as content creators, there's also that other issue of when we do get opportunities, especially in like the freelance space. It's usually just so you can speak about your culture,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that, you know, especially being first generation American, there's so many layers to identity. I grew up in California, spent my summers in Kenya. The food I cook is so broad. And with having my studio, I'm kind of able to really just do whatever I want. So with our editorial, Jaconi.co, I started that really at the beginning of COVID, with the understanding and mindset that I can make this and very few people will care about it or like it, but I feel like we just need space of our own.
Mm-hmm.
And the Black Lives Matter happened after. So it's really odd because I started the project thinking it would be like the most irrelevant because it's how my industry is treated, food of, you know, the African diaspora. And then somehow within the month it became the most like relevant according to news.
Mm-hmm.
And that shift is, if anything, uncomfortable because it's like I built this product knowing how little value it would have to my industry peers. And now it's like the focal point of everything I do, where I'm like, I did this before I started that, but it's the moment, as we notice, that's really put attention towards it.
Yeah, you know, that's one, I think one big learning from tea time and just speaking with all of our different leaders that have a lot of amazing perspectives is that like one, it's amazing. And I'm happy to have this space to be able to talk about issues that are specific to being Black. That's so important. But also there's a lot of it that was like the second iteration of that, which is what you're referring to, which is also having a seat at the table at every conversation and having you know, when your content is rolling on a 360 calendar, like that's not something that's just an editorial spot and
Mm-hmm.
you're only allowed to speak if it's about your cultural participation. That to me is just so gross. So I think like that's a great learning for all of us. I think especially dealing with influencers and content creators that you know, being diverse in your background or culture isn't something that really we should exploit. I
Yeah.
think it's great and it's hard, right? Because and so maybe let's talk about this. Like, well, how do you define and how, like, I guess now that you're being approached a lot more, given just the relevance in the news cycle, how do you define the difference between exploitation and celebration when it's coming to how media sources are treating you?
I think it's kind of, instead of, this is overall, this is like me being a producer director.
Mm-hmm.
Very frequently, the way is people approach the story knowing exactly what they want. It's almost to like affirm their assumptions. So if I'm a journalist and saying, you know, I want to write a piece to show that Nigerian jollof rice is the best ever, I'm going to seek out resources that affirm that, and then maybe approach chefs who don't do that all the time, just for the sake of my story and what I want. And I think it should be a lot more of a conversation where you should either take what the person's putting out there of what they want to talk about or how they want to collaborate,
Mm-hmm.
or just open the conversation and say, we like you, we like what you do, what are the things you're interested in doing moving forward, so we can see the best way to collaborate. I know just as creatives as a whole, your previous work isn't the best indicator for what you want to do the next
Mm-hmm.
day. I always tell clients, like if I send them an old video, I'm like, just so you know, my video style has changed because that's what we do. We evolve as people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just having that open conversation of saying, maybe this is a part of your work that caught my interest. We as a company would love to work with you, whether it be about this topic or something new that you have coming up or something new you want to talk about, and giving the creator the option to, you know, talk about their culture if they want to, or talk about something new that they have on their agenda.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. So that so to kind of summarize that, that's a good learning for my team that's watching is to really, when we're approaching talent and developing concepts for branded campaigns, when it's coming to casting for diversity, it's really giving the creative freedom to the whoever the creator is to tell their story and focus on whatever part of that story that they see as fit. So that's a good learning for us. So thank you for your insight on that front. I wanted to also touch on our donation. So during this live stream, we have donated for Food Chain Workers Alliance on your behalf. So MagicLinks was happy to do that $500 donation for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so could you maybe explain to us a little bit about, I know there was a lot of charities that you were excited and felt great about contributing to. What is it about working within the food space and focusing on Black representation within the food worker industry that has you feeling this?
It really just comes down to the history of this nation. I always kind of jokingly say, like, especially when it comes like cookbook world, Black people have fed this country to be what it is, but somehow the food is just off the table. And I've been learning so much recently about Black farming and how there's so much land loss and Black farmers aren't getting priority with their bank loans, and they are just getting squeezed until they're going to barely exist. And how, the food, I guess, as an overall industry, so agriculture, hospitality, all of that is our top domestic industry. However, it's severely plagued with like improper wages, because you can go to a restaurant and get your waiters are getting paid like $2 an hour in some states. And there's a lot of workers' rights things. So food chain, national food chain alliance, they kind of work across all industries in food to help just create more fair work conditions, better pay, because they literally the people feeding our country and are barely given enough resources to feed themselves.
Yeah, that's super interesting. When you're sourcing ingredients for your own cuisine, how does that thought process work for you?
So this is kind of like, I'm going to give you all my secrets, because I have not struggled with grocery shopping during pandemic, because I always go to the tiny little shops because they have such better stuff, and I like asking questions and you can have a conversation with them. So I'm getting my spices from the Indian grocery store as well as the Nigerian grocery store. And then I go to like my little fancy French market. So I go to boutique grocery stores as much as I can.
Okay.
And then farmers market until recently, because now everyone's caught wind and there's like a 2-hour line to get into the farmers markets. But I've always shopped independent, just because I like learning and trying new things. And when you go to a big grocery store, you don't have that relationship with the people. The employees aren't trained on that. So yeah, I like the tiny little shops.
Yeah, I love that. And so when you're looking for more like heritage recipes, or what would you call them? Like when you're doing things that are inspired by your Kenyan heritage?
Yeah. Well, I think the whole thing is of what we're doing for Jaconia Editorial is that a lot of diaspora cultures, particularly in the African continent, we have a culture of oral tradition. So if you want to learn something, you need to pick up the phone and call someone or go off of memory. I even times, like, because I do professional recipe writing, I will look at photos from my travels in Kenya and like zoom in to the plate and be like, try to figure out what was in there.
Oh my gosh.
Because I can't Google it. There's not enough information. So you have to talk to people and learn that way.
And where do you find those ingredients here in LA? Are there Kenyan stores, or how do you source those local ingredients?
So funny with Kenyan food, which is, I think most people aren't familiar because we don't really have many restaurants in America, definitely not in LA. I can say, if you think of like the flavors you find in a Mexican taqueria, as well as like a Indian restaurant, like a US style Indian restaurant, everything in there comprises Kenyan food. So everything I need is really easily available. We don't have much ingredients that lie without those two cultures, and because they have a strong presence here, I'm able to shop pretty easily.
Got it. That's super interesting. So then in terms of that, I guess I'm curious as well, knowing about oral tradition, like that's such a huge part of that. That's such a beautiful culture. I love that. So it's kind of similar for me. I mean, I'm Hispanic, so a lot of our stuff, it's like I have like pictures written down of like my grandma's pencil writing. It's like crazy.
Yeah, that's amazing that you have that though, because I don't, like, and most of us don't.
But you have of course the platform, especially with video, to really bring some of those oral traditions into something that's long lasting. do you ever plan on maybe taking a trip back to Kenya and doing some sort of series? Or like, let's talk about your new video series. I'm just curious about what's in the
Yeah.
upcoming. Yeah.
My next Kenya trip got, like many people's
Right.
travels, taken away, but I was supposed to have gone this summer as well as in the winter. But with one of the video series we're premiering on Jaconi next month, it's about cooking the food of African diaspora. And because we have our video calls and Zoom, I've been doing video chats with chefs really globally. Like this week, I did a Zoom call with a chef in South Africa and Nairobi, Kenya. So we're able to talk to the people of those regions and get recipes from them. And then in our studio here in LA, cook the videos to go along with those recipe assets. So we can kind of film like a remote cooking show where we're getting the stories from the people who know it best and then using our expertise as food video producers to like create delicious food porn for people to be like, damn, why have I never had South African curry before?
Yeah, I can't wait for that. So that's super exciting. And so tell us more about your studio. I believe you're there right now.
I am. I'm in front of our like cookbook collection in the studio.
Yeah. So how has that been? We'd love to just learn more about you. Opening up a physical space is obviously incredible. I mean, you have the full setup. I think last time we were like FaceTiming so you could show me around, but yeah, can you tell us a little bit about it?
So I say there's two halves to Jaconi. We have our physical studio, which is really custom built for shooting food content. So we have like a kitchen set where production companies will come in and shoot cooking shows. And then we've been shooting our own shows here for our other half, which is Jaconi.co, which is our editorial. So website and social platforms, so YouTube, Instagram, really to create space to highlight voices and food in the African diaspora. So it's all kind of like using food as our anchor to learn about these cultures. And it's not about like to teach, American people or outside people, like, look at us African people, we have stuff to offer. It's really, I want to create it for us. Like I said, I don't have my grandma to have a recipe book, and I have friends who are first generation, second generation who are like, oh, I wish I could make that thing my grandma used to make. I don't know how, and they really don't have the resources available. So I want to create space and start documenting our recipes and food stories. So then when we do want to go make it. So yeah.
That is awesome. I'm curious if from like an outside viewer, what would you say is like the most common misconception about Kenyan food?
That we don't have any food.
Oh, interesting. You think there's just that little of representation that people just truly don't think there's like a full cuisine there?
Absolutely. It's like out of sight, out of mind. While at Tasty, I shot a video with Nadia Corfor, and she's the writer of the Black Panther comics. And she said this, people don't believe that Africa eats, let alone has sophisticated cuisine. And in the comments of that video, audience members affirmed her assumptions. And if you think about it, what are the visuals people have seen of the continent? They get those late night ads, talking about children who are starving and then wildlife. So if people, I can't almost fully fault them of like, if you haven't seen it, then if someone assumes then it just doesn't exist. We don't see a lot of representation of our culture, of our people. It's really through this like Nat Geo and then this like Red Cross lens, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I wonder then, so like across countries in Africa, aside from I'm assuming Kenyan is your favorite cuisine. What other countries do you like to pull inspiration from?
I'll never claim favorites.
Okay.
But I have, it's the one I know the best.
Got it.
I love West African food, so Nigerian, Ghanaian, Senegalese. They're very forward with flavor. There's no shyness with the food. It kind of like is, representative of the people. And then just from shooting our series, I've been trying foods that we haven't had before. So I've been trying the dishes we've been cooking from South Africa, as well as Central Africa. And I'm finding most of them to be more similar than they are different. which is great because I think when we don't know about someone, we assume that they're like living a world apart. Where when we do the shopping for these recipes, like 60 to 70% of the ingredients are the same. So that's really cool.
So that, yeah, that is interesting. I'm also curious, how do you sort of go about balancing more like African American favorites, cuisines as well, like Creole, for example? Like, how do you consider that, or are you thinking more just in terms of things that are native to Africa?
So no, for Jaconi, we're representing the whole diaspora, especially when it comes to like the Americas and the Caribbean, because
Mhm.
and Brazil, because when you look closely
Mhm.
at that food, there's so much connectivity to West African cuisine. It's almost like they're a part of, they are a connected story. So we've been doing, I think most recently we had a few Caribbean chefs, but we're really aiming to tell the stories across the diaspora, not just the continent.
Got it. What would you say that common thread is? Like, what do you see as like sort of the staple that brings them all together?
I see a lot in technique, especially because, West Africans are the ones who really were brought over as slaves here. So when you think of like Nigerian stews and soups and the texture and body, rather than like an American soup is thinner,
Mhm.
more runny, and that viscosity that you'll have like in a gumbo, that viscosity that you have in West Nigerian draw soup, you see that texture commonality. A lot of just like approach to making food. And then, of course, everyone has their regional ingredients, but there's a lot of ingredients like palm oil that were also brought over.
Yeah, very interesting. What do you think has also had its biggest crossover into, I guess, American cuisine?
Ooh, overall American cuisine. That's a tough one because within, and I think this is like what we're learning as we do these videos,
Mhm.
what has been represented, especially in America as far as Black food, is like super narrow. It's the tiniest bit, and we only get like, the same 10 soul food dishes. And so
Mhm.
as we keep unearthing, we're finding that there's just so many more cuisines, even in the seats that we didn't know. So I think we're still discovering to find out if there is like a full run through common thread. But I think that's kind of nice knowing that there's even stateside more that we haven't learned about.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, your knowledge is so vast. I'm honestly shook that you know so much about food. I
I'm a
guess it's
nerd
your
for
job.
it though.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
So that's your full. I mean, that's your day to day. I would love to know though. We really like to close these out because you're such a great example to all of these younger content creators out there that maybe are thinking about getting involved and doing something within the food vertical. At MagicLinks, we really do like to work with content creators across all of the different genres of YouTube
yeah.
and more. So I'm curious, like if you were to give a young content creator or a producer advice, knowing what you know now, like what would that look like?
My always number one piece of advice is always just make it.
Hmm.
I can't sit on ideas long. And the nice thing about modern technology with the quality of cell phones or DSLR cameras, like I tell everyone, at Tasty, we were using Canon regular DSLR on a couple of metal stands. It's what you see a lot of big companies doing is fully accessible, um, within a very small budget to do at home. And then you just keep practicing at it. I learned what I do by just doing it. I didn't go to film school. So there are days on set where I'm like, what does that word mean? Like technical, but as far as like creative, I learned by just making and just iterating and making.
I love that. That's such a great way to view life. Just think, just do now, think later almost, which is a great way to live.
Everything I do is do now,
Yeah.
think later.
So, okay, so you have a lot coming up. So we know that you have some two new video series coming out. Could you give us any sort of like more info, the names of the series, or what can we get from you?
Yeah, so from Jaconi, we have two series. One is one I talked about earlier, Cooking the Diaspora,
Yeah.
where we feature recipes from chefs, bloggers, and even home cooks, showing their lens on food. And the second series is when I'm hosting, and it's just like my way of cooking, not really culturally tied. So it's called Kiano's Afro-Cali Kitchen. And it's really just me sharing, I think for the first time, exactly how I like to make food,
Okay.
not under the guise of a brand or their voice, but really just my approach to cooking.
Okay, and so one last question. I know we're about to hit our 30-minute mark. What is your like number one little like, I don't know, like what's your number one skill that you think would make you different than maybe how other people cook?
Ooh. So like kind of like what is like my culinary
Yeah, like what's your
style?
technique or what are we going to learn about your unique cooking style that may be different?
So I think a lot of what we're used to from TV cooks or home cooks, it's like very much like feeling and all that stuff. I am very much like an anthropologist and a scientist when it comes to cooking. So all the foods I make are kind of a mix of culture and history, but not necessarily like in a linear way, where I'll pull something that's used in Scandinavia and infuse it into something that we do all the time in East Africa. What I really do is I try to find what we all do in common as far as food, and then start shuffling it around a little bit.
Interesting. Well, we cannot wait to watch that. And I'm wondering, do you do catering? Because we will definitely hire for an event.
I
Absolutely.
always say I am strictly in the teaching business.
Ah, fine, fine. Well, we need some good recommendations for sure. I mean, or if not, at the very minimum, please, I'll bring over some wine with Nikki and we can do a cooking night. Maybe I'll make some biscochitos or something for my
Yes, I am down to teach. I love teaching people how to
Yeah,
make food dishes.
yeah, that we would love that. Well, Kiano, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And everyone, we do this every week. So typically it's on Fridays. We're going to try out a few other time slots as well. So Tea Time by MagicLinks is really here to just have these conversations that need to be had and to give space to Black leaders in our community to talk about what they feel passionate about. So we'll be back next week. And thanks, Kiano. Well, everyone have a good weekend.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.